This is Geoff Wildman of redsky.uk.net with one of my bite-sized talks on the book of Revelation. In this talk I'd like us to look at the 7 short messages which the risen Jesus gave to John for the 7 churches in the province of Asia. Now, all 7 churches are given a word of hope by Jesus, but there the similarities end. All but one of the churches receive a word of praise from Jesus. But sadly, Laodicea is unique in that it receives no word of praise from Jesus. Laodicea was a wealthy church, but that wasn't its problem. Its problem was that its riches had blinded it to the fact that for all its wealth, it was, in Jesus' own words, wretched, poor, blind, pitiful, and naked. Jesus talks in the Gospels of the deceitfulness of riches and of those who put their trust in riches, but who are not rich towards God. And he counsels the Laodiceans in a very similar way. But Jesus has more to say in his diagnosis of the Laodicean condition. He calls them lukewarm. And he continues this metaphor when he says he wishes they were either hot or cold, that is, either in the church serving or in the world sinning, but not in the church idly sitting. Jesus would rather have us in the world and sinning than in the church and lukewarm. Quite a revelation, isn't it? But why would Jesus say such a thing? Well, because a lukewarm church, a lukewarm Christian, is a bad advertisement, and an advertisement Jesus simply doesn't need. Faith, love, witness, service, faithfulness, perseverance, it's things like these for which Jesus praises the other 6 churches. But Laodicea is unique in that it receives no word of praise from Jesus. So, Jesus says, because you are lukewarm, neither hot nor cold, I am about to spew you out of my mouth. To paraphrase, you make me sick. Now, apart from Laodicea, there's one other of the 7 churches which is unique, but for a very different reason. Ephesus, for all the praise Jesus lavishes on it, Ephesus is the only church Jesus explicitly threatens with closure. Unless they repent, Jesus says, I will remove your lampstand. What on earth could be wrong with this church? Well, Jesus says they have forsaken their first love. Jesus, in the Gospels, summed up the whole of the Mosaic law in just 2 commandments: to love God with every fibre of our being, and to love others just as we love ourselves. He also added what he called a new commandment, that his followers should love one another just as he had loved them. So, for Jesus, love is the top priority. Now, in which of these 3 areas love was lacking in Ephesus, we're not actually told. Maybe it was in all 3. But whatever, they are told to repent and to recapture it. Now, in the US currently, there is a debate raging in certain church circles. Some are claiming that God hates sinners, whilst others are saying that God hates sin, not the sinner. Well, it's amongst this latter group that I find myself. God hates sin, not the sinner. Listen to Jesus' words to the church in Ephesus. But you have this in your favour, he says. You hate the practices of the Nicolaitans, which I also hate. So, it's indisputable. The risen Jesus and the believers in Ephesus hate the practices, not the practitioners. The sin, not the sinner. Can we do any more than follow Jesus' example? Like Ephesus, the preachers of hate in the US need to heed Jesus' call to love. Otherwise, he may well close them down. In spite of all their dollars, Laodicea came close to closure. In spite of all their denarii, we heard Jesus threaten to spew them out of his mouth. Is that a metaphor for closing them down, I wonder? You bet. Unlike Laodicea, however, Jesus does find a few in Sardis he's not ashamed to be associated with. He talks of those who haven't soiled their garments, those who've kept themselves unspotted from the world. But apart from these few believers, Jesus has no other word of praise for the church in Sardis. Interestingly, he says that they have a reputation for being a live church. But they are, in truth, he says, a dead church or a sleeping church. In fact, he uses both words. Sleep, of course, is a well-known scriptural metaphor for death, and Jesus does tell them to wake up. Let's lighten the gloom a little, shall we? 2 of the remaining 4 churches, amazingly, receive not a single word of criticism from Jesus. If Laodicea is lukewarm, Ephesus loveless, and Sardis half dead or half asleep, then we can only call Philadelphia and Smyrna perfect. I've heard some preachers say that there's no such thing as a perfect church. But obviously Jesus doesn't agree. Be perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect, Jesus teaches us in the Gospels. The churches in Philadelphia and Smyrna prove that perfection is possible this side of eternity. And the remaining 2 churches? Well, like the rest, but unlike Laodicea, both Pergamum and Thyatira receive a word of praise from Jesus. But there is criticism, and of a sort none of the other 5 churches receive. There is sexual immorality and idolatry present. A reference to the patron deities of some local trade guilds, perhaps. If so, compromising for occupational and financial gain seems to have been a problem here. Or simply a reference to some local fertility cult. Sex. How many believers have slipped on that banana skin over the last 2 millennia? So, what's your church like? Lukewarm? Loveless? Asleep? Immoral? Or faultless? I hope you found that interesting. Thanks for listening.